Welcome to the RASCANU Show. Our guest today is Simona Zaslavsky, who is a licensed paralegal and works with Mayfair Law Group. She's a partner there. Simona, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate the opportunity to continue our conversation within this context. Mayfair Law Group and yourself have been huge supporters of the Real Estate TO event series, and very much appreciate that. And I figured that it would be a neat opportunity for us to do a bit of a dive into what it means to be a paralegal within the real estate context. When do individuals reach out to a paralegal like yourself? And what are some of the expectations that one might appropriately have with regards to when when they use a paralegal services in the real estate context. Um, Simona, how did you get to become a licensed paralegal?
So a long time ago, probably let's say 25 years ago, my family was involved in medical rehabilitation clinics, so physiotherapy. And through high school and in university, I worked there as my part-time job. And I got to see a lot of people and meet a lot of people who had been in car accidents and had fallen down, and got a chance to, really see the dynamic of how the clinic would help these people. So then I started looking to what personal injury is, which is what Mayfair Law Group had started doing, primarily just personal injury. And so personal injury is something that paralegals were allowed to practice in a scope of. Now, there aren't a lot of things that they're not allowed to do anymore. Considering 20 years back, the scope was much more limited, whereas now paralegals can practice in family law. That's brand new. That's only a year new. So our scope is getting a lot bigger. But going back to your question, I wanted to know how I could really do something where I could help people and help them, guide them. I'm a huge people person, and I'm a natural nurturer. And for me, it wasn't really, going to school for being an educator or, a teacher, things like that. That wasn't my thing. And I loved law and I love reading. If anybody ever wants to buy me a present,
The
buy
book.
me a book. Buy me a book on anything, and I will forever be grateful. Any book. I love reading. And so taking those two things that I love, my passions, I tried to get into law school. I had gone to university, I tried to get into law school, but the LSAT, if anyone's ever written it, hates it because it doesn't evaluate what you know. It evaluates the way that you think. And I don't know if it's a brilliant test, but it's a test that weeds people out. So unfortunately, my LSAT score only allowed me to go to school overseas, and it wasn't possible at the time. So my option B was to go and get my paralegal license, which I could have done, and I did in 1 year. I fast tracked. I went every single day. I wrote my license, and I became a paralegal. So that's how my journey started.
Hmm, wonderful. And now you got your license. You finished the course within the year, the fast track way. And what happened afterwards? Because I know that you practice across personal injury, which is what your initial experience was around, and there came a time when you transitioned into practicing in real estate law as well. How
Mhm.
did that come about?
So when I started practicing 17 years ago, I did small claims and I did landlord and tenant. That's where I focused on. And then I started doing personal injury very slowly. And the landlord and tenant board was completely different 17 years ago than it is now. Forget about the fact that it used to be in person. It was a different process, and it wasn't the same as it is now in terms of wait times and things like that. So when I started my own firm, when Mayfair Law Group was born, we were primarily personal injury. And we had become the type of firm that customer service is our absolute priority.
Mm.
So when people get into an accident, when they're hurt, when they fall, they're hurt. They need money, they need therapy, they need stuff right away. And my main objective for Mayfair was customer service. And somebody calls, you call them back within an hour. Somebody emails, you email them back within an hour. If you can't, then I will. We're very team-based. And we perfected this perfect hamster wheel that in my head, I was thinking, well, where else can we use this strong, strong, strong team and help other people? And yes, sometimes when you're buying and selling a house, you're not really helping someone. But in my eyes, it's one of the biggest purchases a person will ever make.
Mm-hmm.
So the stress and anxiety that comes along with it, why not help relieve it? And my team, I'm nothing without them. Without my team, I tell them every single day how grateful I am for them. And they've allowed us to perfect the real estate world now.
That's awesome. And when it comes to real estate transactions, I know that you spend quite a bit of time at the landlord-tenant board when it comes to landlord side matters, tenant side matters. There's also transactions that have to do with the buying and selling of properties residentially, primarily. What are the kinds of transactions that you tend to see on a regular basis? And what are the kinds of things that you wish individuals who are transacting in real estate in Toronto knew before they got in touch with a paralegal to support in one type of transaction or another within the context of real estate?
That's actually a great question. So I'm going to separate it into two things. I'm going to separate it into the regular real estate transactions, which are the purchase and sales, and then I'll separate it into the landlord and tenant. Okay. But they both have a common thread to them. Before you start anything, before you do anything, ask somebody who knows. And when it comes to something like the landlord and tenant board, when I get a call from the landlord, from the tenant. I'm not biased. I help both. I always get a call months after something has started happening. Oh, they haven't paid me for 4 months. Oh, my landlord is threatening to kick me out and hasn't served me anything since August. It's never before it happens. Nobody ever asks, because everyone seems to think that if you go on Facebook and you ask a group, that's proper legal advice. And I so badly want to sit at night and respond to these Facebook groups and say, no, please email me. It doesn't, advice is free. Advice is free. Just talk to me before. Let me review a lease agreement. You cannot put no pets. You can't do that. Well, they signed it. Well, it means nothing, right? So when it comes to landlord and tenant, I encourage people to reach out, email, ask. It doesn't cost anything, and it'll probably save time, money, anxiety. I mean, the benefits are endless. When it comes to real estate transactions, as in purchase and sale, the thing is that it's not really the responsibility of the buyer or the seller to have everything in place. Just make sure you have a strong legal team, and make sure you have a strong, broker and real estate agent. Make sure they click, and make sure that they are your team, and everyone just kind of has to stay in their lane. If the client asks me a question about the mortgage, I will never answer it. I will always defer it to the mortgage broker. And I would kind of expect the same back, right? Don't answer for me. I'm here for a reason, and I'm not going to answer for you because that's your lane. So when it comes to purchase and sale, the clients really can't do much, but just have faith in who their team is.
Very good. And when it comes to the matters that relate to the landlord tenant board, let's imagine that you are interacting right now with a landlord who has a tenant who received repeated follow-ups with regards to the payment of rent who hasn't paid in 4 months, looking back to the example that you gave earlier. So now 4 months in of rent non-payment, they reach out to you. The landlord reaches out to you and says, I don't know what to do. There's all kinds of different scenarios that landlords conceive of. Some I've heard, there was one landlord I was talking to recently, and he was assembling a legal team to sue the tenant for non-payment of rent and not allowing people to see the unit because he was trying to find new tenants for it. There's all kinds of different scenarios that people get themselves into as they're trying to get out of an unfortunate situation, a difficult situation like that. How do you think through with the landlord in such a scenario?
I like to start backwards, and I will tell the landlord that I genuinely would like to save the money. I genuinely would like them to not have to go to the board because the wait times are outrageous. So I try to become a mediator. And I try to figure out backwards how we can work forwards to a solution. So I ask them ultimately, what is your goal? What is it that you want at the end? Do you want the tenant to just pay and have a payment plan and stay? Do you want the tenant to leave? Do you want to sell your property? What is it that you want? And we start to work backwards. I'll also ask them for, probably a history of their relationship. So how did the tenancy begin? Was there any correspondence, emails, text? When's the last time that you were at the unit? Did you do an inspection? How often do you do inspections? Let me review the lease. Let me see if you filed any forms. Are they filed properly? So I start to work backwards up until present day to help them get to that end solution that they want.
That's great. Thank you. Let's look to another scenario where a property owner has a house that's available for lease. It hasn't been, they haven't approved any of the tenants that have applied in the last 4 months. It just seems that the rate at which the property is listed is competitive. They should be able to get that, say, $3,000 a month based on the location of the property. They're just not finding the right kind of tenant that they're looking for. And lo and behold, there's a new realtor who comes around and signs up this particular landlord for them to be able to help them find tenants. And one thing that the realtor advises the landlord is the fact that there might be a personal injury matter involved in this transaction, in the sense that there are issues with the stairs leading up into the property. So the only way that you can get to the front door is to follow these steps, and the steps themselves have a lot of cracks in them. And especially as we're approaching winter, there is significant likelihood of somebody getting injured as they're getting into their unit. This may be impacting the ability for the landlord to find the right tenant, because the right tenant might walk away because they have other options. They don't want to be in a situation where it's unsafe to get into their unit because they don't know if the landlord will fix the matter. But a deeper issue is if somebody is found and they do get into the unit and winter comes and they do slip and fall, what could happen in that scenario? What should the landlord be aware of that could happen if there is a slip and fall on their premises and there's clear indication from before the lease even started that there is somewhat of an unsafe environment to get into the unit?
So that question, as out of the blue as it was, is actually a file that I have right now. And it is a file where the tenant and the landlord live in the same unit complex, and the stairs outside have been unsafe for a very long time. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, the tenant has taken a terrible fall, has broken both hands, and has now come and said, what do I do? So the number one thing that everyone always has to have, whether you're driving a car, whether you're a tenant, a landlord, is insurance. It is simply peace of mind. And I've spoken to a couple of people lately where the tenants have insurance and the landlord doesn't, which scares me. But there is tenant insurance that will cover liability up until 2 million, I think. So you definitely have to look at your policy. And if you want me to take a look at it, I'll look at it. So if you are going to be renting from someone where you see that there is something unsafe, like the stairs, make your efforts and make sure that you're documenting that this is an unsafe situation. And, you let the landlord know, this is unsafe. This is unsafe. I'm letting you know, I'm not liking this. When can we fix it? If something happens, if the tenant falls, if the tenant's friend falls, a visitor falls, the mailman falls, the onus is on the landlord. Now, the landlord is responsible to keep the premise safe. The tenants are not allowed and are not responsible for shoveling snow or, mowing the lawn. Everything in terms of maintenance has to be done by the landlord, especially if the tenants told them, this is not right, something's going to happen. The landlord's insurance will respond to any claims that are going to be brought against the house. So a search will be done, and a search of the house will be done, and they'll see whoever's on title and they'll see whoever's responsible. They'll get a notice letter that an action is about to start because of the negligence of the owner. And it just starts a whole big process.
Very interesting. And so that creates a smooth transition from one side of the law firm to the other in terms of the services you provide. Very interesting. And so being aware of both types of matters, both personal injury and real estate, it can be complementary in terms of the services you provide.
100%. When it comes to landlord and tenant, anybody I ever speak to, whether it's a client, whether it's an agent, a mortgage broker, or somebody who has a friend, if they have a question, I encourage, please call me. It could be a Sunday. A 10-minute call can just make the biggest difference to one person. And even if it leads them in the right direction, at least it leads them in that direction. They're not asking the wrong people, or they're not going to the wrong forums, getting the wrong information.
Yeah. And if we're thinking about someone being successful within the context of the landlord and tenant board here in Ontario, and I know that you spend quite a bit of time there, what would be an example of a successful case that you've recently worked on that was seen at the landlord and tenant board?
So a lot of the cases that are coming around are people that have to sell their properties because they can't afford them, or circumstances changed. And maybe it was 6 months ago, I had a landlord that came to me and said, I've asked my tenants to leave because I lost my job and I cannot afford to carry this house. My finances have changed. My mortgage has gone up. I just can't do it. So we started with talking to them, reasoning with them, seeing if they would be willing to leave on their own. Unfortunately, these were tenants that felt that they were educated and empowered and said, we're going to wait for the board to kick us out. Now, the one thing that I don't have control over is how fast an application is heard. And I will always be honest and say, you will not get a resolution for at least 1 year. Okay. And this had gone on for a year. So we
Wow.
had just resolved it 6 months ago. And what happened was the point is that when you put in an application, whether you're a landlord, whether you're a tenant, the onus is on you to prove what you are alleging. Make sure you have evidence. So when I originally spoke to the landlord, I said, okay, so you're saying that you lost a job, you can't find a job. I need you to send me all of your applications. I need you to send me all of your job attempts. Send me your record of employment. Show me that you got fired. You have to prove to me what you are alleging and what you are claiming.
Mm-hmm.
So our evidence was based on her not being able to afford anything. And they had said something about, why is she selling one property and not the other, where one of the properties, the property tax was very high, and there was a higher chance of her selling one more than the other. I collected comps, I got her property tax bills, I collected everything. And what I do is I position myself as if I'm the adjudicator, and I want to know, what is it that's going to push you over to prove of what you're claiming, what you're alleging?
Mm-hmm.
So all of the evidence that we collected and presented was enough to get an order for an eviction. But it took a year.
Wow. Yeah.
It took a year. That's the problem. And I don't have control over that.
Yeah. 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 Thank you so much for sharing that particular example. Yeah, it can be quite devastating financially when someone gets themselves in that kind of a bind. And initially, all might have been well, but over time things change, and there's significant life circumstances that can occur. Now, this has been really helpful conversation. If someone who's listening to our chat right now and they want to get in touch with you, how can they be in touch with you, Simona, and how can they connect with Mayfair Law Group for any other additional services that you provide?
So I live on my phone, and I do it because people need me. You can DM us through Instagram. I will get it right away. Our handle is Mayfair Law Group. You can send me an email, simona@mayfairlawgroup.com, or you can call the office, ask to speak to me. If I'm not there, they will give you my cell number. So it's 416-546-1581.
Great. And I'll include those details in the description of this episode. Well, Simona, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. I appreciate you being on the RASCANU Show.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you always.